Hello there, welcome to this revision video for Edexcel GCSE History, Weimar and Nazi Germany, 1918 to 1939. This is going to focus on topic 3, Nazi Control and Dictatorship from 1933 to 1939. So this shows you the syllabus for topic 3. There's 4 different areas of this part of the syllabus. The creation of a dictatorship, 1933 to 1934. The police state, controlling and influencing attitudes. And then the 4th one is opposition, resistance, and conformity. So the first part is all about the creation of a dictatorship from 1933 to 1934. We're going to be looking at the Reichstag fire, the Enabling Act, and the banning of other parties and trade unions. We're going to talk about the threat from Ernst Röhm and the SA, the Night of the Long Knives, the death of Hindenburg, Hitler becoming Führer, and the Army Oath of Allegiance. Okay, so the first part of this topic is the creation of a dictatorship 1933 to 1934. Now, as we saw in the last video, Hitler was appointed Chancellor, which means leader of Germany, on the 30th of January 1933. But there were several limits to his power. Firstly, Franz von Papen had persuaded Hindenburg to appoint Hitler Chancellor by promising he would be able to control him. In fact, von Papen had told Hindenburg he had Hitler in his pocket and that within 2 months we will have pushed Hitler so far into a corner that he'll squeak like a mouse. Only 3 of the 12 in the cabinet were actually Nazis. There was Hermann Goering, Adolf Hitler and Wilhelm Frick. President Hindenburg could still get rid of Hitler if he chose to, and there were still trade unions, other political parties and the state parliaments that could restrict Hitler's power. So we're just going to look at the steps in terms of creating a dictatorship, and you can read the overview of these events. So we're going to be looking at the Reichstag fire. In a nutshell, the Reichstag was destroyed by the fire started by Dutch communist Maurits van der Lubbe, and it led to Hitler persuading Hindenburg to pass the Decree for Protection of People in the State, reduced people's rights, allowed communists to be arrested, including the communist leader Ernst Thälmann. That then led to the 5th of March elections, where the Nazis intimidated political opponents. They took control of the media with their anti-communist message. The Nazis gained 44% of the vote and 288 seats. But despite all that, the communists still got 4.8 million votes and 81 seats. The Enabling Act then, on the 24th of March, gave Hitler the power to be a dictator. He'd achieved the necessary 2/3 majority by banning the communists and persuading the Catholic Centre Party and the National Party to support it. It passed 444 votes to 94. This then led to trade unions being taken over, the leaders arrested, the trade unions were merged into the German Labour Front and into the DAF, which was completely controlled by the Nazis. All political parties were banned by July 1933. Germany was now a one-party state. This then led to state parliaments themselves being abolished in January 1934. And then finally, the Night of the Long Knives on the 30th of June 1934, Hitler used the SS to destroy the leadership of the SA, help prevent a potential second revolution challenge from the leader of the SA, Ernst Röhm. So let's delve into those events in a little bit more depth and detail. So on the 27th of February 1933, the Reichstag burnt down. A Dutch communist, Maurits van der Lubbe, was found inside the building. The Nazis tried to present this as a wider communist conspiracy. However, van der Lubbe said he had started a fire in protest at the treatment of German working class people at his trial, and he said, "I set fire to the Reichstag all by myself." Now, the Nazis used the Reichstag fire to increase their power. Hitler persuaded President Hindenburg to pass the Reichstag fire decree. This enabled the Nazis to break up political meetings, arrest communists, and bring in harsh punishments for opposition. A headline in Volkischer Beobachter, a Nazi newspaper, talked about mass arrests everywhere. The communist leader, pictured there, Ernst Thälmann, was arrested on the 3rd of March 1933. And he would remain imprisoned in solitary confinement until his execution on the 18th of August 1944. 474 were taken into protective custody in Leipzig. This was a Nazi euphemism, a way of saying for being sent to a concentration camp. But despite all this, the communists still polled 81 seats and 4.8 million votes, which was 12.3% of the votes in the 5th of March 1933 election. Now, from there were elections on the 5th of March 1933, which would be the last one held in Germany until 1945. But even despite the fact that Hitler was Chancellor, the Nazis did not secure an overall majority despite widespread voter intimidation. The historian Richard J. Evans said, "A combination of terror, repression and propaganda was mobilised in every community, large and small, across the land. The Nazis got 288 seats, so they didn't have enough for a majority, but it still gave them enough control to go on to the next step of their dictatorship, which was passing the Enabling Act. So on the 24th of March 1933, Hitler passed the Enabling Act by 444 votes to 94. Only 94 Social Democrats voted against. This gave Hitler the power to make any law that he wanted to. It meant that the Reichstag, the German parliament, could not stop him from passing laws he wanted to, and this was a vital step in establishing the dictatorship. Now, in terms of removing opposition, this was the next step. So trade unions and then other political parties were removed. So trade unions were there to protect the rights of workers and fight for better paying conditions. But in February 1933, the Nazis had arrested leading trade union members. Now, Joseph Goebbels, who was in charge of propaganda, promised a holiday for German labour, German workers, which took place on the 1st of May, a day of national labour. The very next day, the 2nd of May, offices of every left-wing trade union were raided, leaders were arrested, and newspapers closed down. The trade unions were then all taken over by the German Labour Front, the DAF, which was a Nazi organisation, and therefore this massively reduced workers' rights. In terms of political parties, the Social Democrats had been the biggest political party and the biggest threat to the Nazis. On the 10th of May 1933, the Nazis seized the offices of the Social Democrats and their wealth and their resources. On the 21st of June, Wilhelm Frick, who was one of the leading Nazis, used an emergency decree order to ban the Social Democrats as a dangerous enemy. 3,000 Social Democrats were arrested. Other political parties disbanded voluntarily, having seen what happened to the Social Democrats, and on 14th of July, the act to ban new parties basically meant that Germany became a one-party state, and the only political party allowed was, of course, the Nazis. So the next key event for you to be aware of is the Night of the Long Knives, which took place in June 1934. Now, why was the SA a threat to Hitler? Well, Ernst Röhm, pictured there, was leader of the SA, and he wanted a second revolution, which would see the Nazis doing more to help the working class. Röhm did not like the fact that Hitler was linked to rich industrialists and landowners. The SA numbered 3 million, and they were loyal to Röhm, and most of the SA were working class men. The SA were becoming increasingly violent and difficult to control. The army was worried that the SA would replace the army, which was led by Hermann Göring. Röhm talked of taking over the German army as well. When Hitler dismissed this idea, Röhm called Hitler a ridiculous corporal. SS leaders such as Himmler and Heydrich did not like Röhm and wanted the SS to be more powerful. So we get the impression here that Röhm has overstepped the mark. He's becoming a real threat, personal threat to Hitler. So this is what happened on the Night of the Long Knives. Hitler arranged a meeting with Röhm and 100 other SA leaders at a hotel in Bavaria. When they arrived, Röhm and the senior officers of the SA were arrested, imprisoned, and many shot dead. Röhm was given the chance to commit suicide, but he didn't, and he was shot dead. Franz von Pappen's office was searched and some of his staff were killed. Göring told the German public that Röhm had been killed to stop him planning a revolution to replace Hitler. In total, 85 people were murdered, including 12 Reichstag deputies. So this shows the absolute violence of the Nazis in terms of establishing control in Germany. So this is a cartoon published in Britain in 1934 by David Lowe. The cartoon is called They Salute with Both Hands. The Night of the Long Knives increased the power of the Nazis. It reduced the power of the SA, with its membership dropping from 2.9 million to 1.6 million, and Victor Lutz, a Nazi loyal to Hitler, became the new SA leader. It secured the loyalty of the army. General Blomberg, head of the German army, congratulated Hitler on his, quote, soldierly decision. It led to the rise of the SS and Heinrich Himmler, who were much more loyal to Hitler. The SS's power increasing led to a culture of fear and terror in Nazi Germany. Other opponents were arrested, like Franz von Papen. It led to the execution of 85 people, and Hitler made a speech in the Reichstag saying he was, quote, the supreme judge of the German people, and it established the idea that Hitler was the law. President Hindenburg approved of the action because he felt he was bringing order to the streets of Germany. And just to analyse this cartoon in a bit more detail, you can see the labels here. The SA with both their hands up, Hermann Göring pictured there. Hitler's the words on Hitler's arm read the double cross, the sign of his betrayal. Got Joseph Goebbels there as well. That reads Hitler's unkept promises, the idea that he didn't keep his sort of promises to help the working class. And the feet in the sort of bottom right represent the killed SA leadership, obviously including Ernst Röhm. Okay, so in terms of establishing this dictatorship, on the 2nd of August 1934, President Hindenburg died at the age of 87. Hindenburg would still potentially have been a block to Hitler becoming all powerful. On his death, Hitler combined the roles of Chancellor and President to become known as the Führer. On the 19th of August 1934, a referendum was held about this, and 90% of voters said they approved of Hitler becoming Führer. Only 4.5 million people in Germany had voted against it, with 45 million approving. The army then took an oath of allegiance. Hitler also took on the role of Commander-in-Chief of Germany's armed forces, and the army took an oath of loyalty direct to Hitler. Hitler sought to make Germany a strong and powerful military country through rearmament, conscription, and eventual expansion of Germany. As part of the oath, the army agreed to stay out of politics. So Hitler had been able to become a dictator of Germany, and there quickly became a cult of the Führer, with Hitler becoming revered and almost worshipped by many people within Nazi Germany. So in the next part of the video, we're going to talk about the police state. That includes the role of the Gestapo, the SS and concentration camps, and also the Nazi control of the legal system. So we're going to start off by talking about the role of the SS. Now, Heinrich Himmler was leader of the SS, and you can see this double lightning bolt was the symbol of the SS. The SS, or known as Schutzstaffel, began as part of the SA with around 250 members who acted as a personal bodyguard to Hitler. Heinrich Himmler became leader in 1929, and the SS became a paramilitary organisation with a reputation for obedience and commitment. By 1933, it only numbered 52,000. Himmler insisted that the SS should be made up of men of pure German blood, Aryans. The SS grew in significance after the Night of the Long Knives in June 1934. Spies, police courts, concentration camps all came to be controlled by the SS and Heinrich Himmler, and it was the key organisation in the so-called machinery of terror. Heinrich Himmler once said, "The best political weapon is the weapon of terror. Cruelty commands respect. Men may hate us, but we don't ask for their love, only their fear." And that was a quote from Heinrich Himmler. So what else did the police state do? Well, the SS gathered intelligence on people through the Gestapo and informers, and the main methods of intelligence gathering were firstly the SD, the Secret Service. This was the main intelligence gathering organisation. The SD focused on opposition to the party itself, especially within the church. They did not particularly focus on individual opposition. The SD was led by Reinhard Heydrich. There were only a few hundred full-time agents. Then there's the Gestapo, which was the secret police, and it spied on the public to remove opposition. The Gestapo had originally begun as the Prussian state police. It had 15,000 officers to police a population of 66 million, but the Gestapo was incredibly feared. It could arrest and imprison any person suspected of opposing the Nazi state. From 1933, it focused on political opposition, but its role expanded to target Jews, gay people, and religious dissenters. The Gestapo tapped phone lines and opened mail. However, they mostly relied on informers using the Nazi system of block leaders. Other aspects of the police state included concentration camps. Aside from death, this was the ultimate punishment for people. The aim was to keep people away from society and in harsh conditions. The first concentration set up was at Dachau. In the early years, 70 concentration camps were set up in 1933 to imprison about 45,000 communists, trade unions and political opposition. Many were run by the SA, but they were seen as being wild and disorganised, and many were closed down. In the later years, the death heads units were created, and we'll talk about that. So in June 1933, Theodor Eicke, who's pictured there, was appointed to run Dachau and bring order to it. His death heads units wore skulls on their SS hats. In 1937, Himmler said guards could not be imprisoned for extreme actions, and the number of deaths went up. The camps also began to use prisoners as manual labour. By the mid-1930s, groups such as the Workschei, religious groups and some Jewish people began to be sent there. The camps had strict rules, and even minor offences could result in harsh punishments. So this is a picture of the Dachau concentration camp. The early concentration camp was on the site of a disused gunpowder and munitions factory, and the image shows the first prisoner transport in a bus arriving at the gatehouse of Dachau on the 22nd of March 1933. Okay, so in terms of the Nazi control of the legal system, when the Nazis came to power, some judges were removed because they were Jewish or had left-wing views or communist views. Remaining judges had to join a Nazi organisation. Getting a fair trial was no longer possible. Punishments became harsher. The number of offences which carried the death penalty rose from 3 in 1933 to 46 by 1943. Now, Hitler had been angry that some communists seemingly got away with the Reichstag fire when there was the Reichstag fire trial at the start of 1934, so he felt the courts were not loyal enough to the Nazis. So in April 1934, the Nazis passed the Act to set up the People's Court, which created a separate court known as the People's Court. outside the normal justice system to deal with political offences. Only Nazi-approved judges were chosen. The number of death penalties rose rapidly as the years passed. Okay, so in topic 3, we're going to talk about controlling and influencing attitudes. We're going to look at Goebbels and the Ministry of Propaganda, censorship, the Nazi use of the media, rallies and sport, including the Berlin Olympics of 1936. We're going to talk about Nazi-controlled culture and the arts, including art, architecture, literature and film, and then Nazi attempts to control the Catholic and Protestant churches, the Concordat and the Reich Church. So in terms of controlling and influencing attitudes, Joseph Goebbels is really significant. He's in charge of propaganda. Now, the Ministry of Public Enlightenment, which led on propaganda, was created in March 1933. Goebbels was in charge. He was intelligent, driven, and a ruthless member of the Nazi Party. He used a wide range of propaganda to spread the Nazi message and crush any dissenting views through censorship and control. Hitler had talked about the methodology behind propaganda in Mein Kampf in 1924. He said the receptive powers of the masses are very limited and their understanding is feeble. On the other hand, they quickly forget. Such being the case, all effective propaganda must be confined to a few bare essentials, and those must be expressed as far as possible in stereotyped formulas. These slogans should be persistently repeated until the very last individual has come to grasp the idea that has been put forward. And Goebbels once said, a lie told once remains a lie, but a lie told 1,000 times becomes the truth. And this gets to the heart of Nazi propaganda. All media, including books, film, newspapers and radio broadcasting, was censored by the Ministry of Propaganda. In October 1933, the Nazis passed the Editor's Law to control the content of newspapers. Now, a good case study to be aware of is Leni Riefenstahl. She was a German filmmaker who was commissioned by Hitler to make a film about the 1934 Nuremberg rally. The film was released in 1935. It helped build the idea of the cult of the Führer and presented the Nazis, and in particular Hitler, as incredibly powerful. The film showed Hitler coming into Nuremberg by plane and being greeted by cheering crowds. Cameras were put on cranes to provide sweeping shots, and at night the parade ground became a cathedral of light. The film looked like a documentary film. Riefenstahl took over 61 hours of film, which was heavily edited into a 2-hour film to make the Nazis and Hitler look all-powerful. The story of Leni Riefenstahl and the triumph of the will showed how the Nazis used film and rallies in order to control the German people through propaganda. The cinema enabled those who were not able to go to the Nuremberg rally to experience the propaganda effect of it. This shows you some still images from the film. Triumph of the Will shows the scale and effectiveness of the Nazi use of a range of different types of propaganda, from rallies to radio and film. It reflects their use of new technology too. So Nazi rallies were a key area of control. They showed off Nazi power. Every year at Nuremberg, the annual party rally was attended by 250,000 people. There were marches, uniforms, flags, parades and speeches, and it helped present the image that everyone supported the Nazis. The rallies were shown in cinemas and featured in films such as Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will. As we've seen, the film opened with shots of Hitler's plane descending from the sky. The rallies had a semi-religious atmosphere and crowds were often hysterical at the sight of Hitler. Another key way the Nazis controlled people was through newspapers. Any newspapers that opposed Nazi views were closed down. They published their own newspaper. The most famous was called Der Stürmer, which meant the Stormer. It was violently anti-Semitic. Goebbels issued regular statements about what could be printed, with nothing negative being able to be printed about Nazi Germany. The radio was also key. Radio broadcasting was absolutely vital. Loudspeakers were put in public places so people could listen to Hitler's speeches on the radio. The radio was made really cheap. The People's Receiver was their cheap version of the radio, so that most Germans could afford one. By 1939, 70% of Germans owned a radio. This propaganda poster, the text translates as "All of Germany hears the Führer with the People's Receiver." The Nazis used propaganda posters to persuade people to support the Nazis. Such propaganda posters would be put up all around Germany. It was impossible to avoid seeing them. Many such posters spread the idea of the cult of the Führer, focusing on the image of Hitler as we see in these two examples. Meanwhile, the fact that people greeted each other with the Hitler salute and how Hitler reinforced the importance of Hitler's image. Even in 1933, there were huge celebrations for Hitler's 44th birthday on the 20th of April 1933, and even more so for his 50th birthday in 1939. Again, here's some examples of Nazi propaganda posters, and you can see what they mean here. They focus on sort of the idea of Aryan and the sort of technology of the German railways, for example, and the links with the youth as well. So the Berlin Olympics took place in Germany in 1936. Now Hitler changed the plans for the 1936 Berlin Olympic Stadium. He wanted a monumental stadium to show off Germany's power. Olympic flags and swastikas covered the new 100,000-seater stadium in Berlin. During the Olympics, they took down anti-Semitic signs in Berlin and ordered newspapers to tone down stories. The German team had been trained to show Aryan superiority. The German team won the most medals. In the long jump, German long jumper Lutz Longbow showed his sportsmanship against black American athlete Jesse Owens, giving him advice when he fouled his first 2 jumps. It's a nice story to take away from the 1936 Olympics. Jesse Owens went on to win the long jump gold as well as 3 other gold medals. Long ended up with a silver in the long jump. Now, in terms of controlling and influencing attitudes, the Nazis had control of culture and the arts. The Nazis were against the cultural freedoms of the Weimar Republic. In September 1933, the Nazis created the Reich Chamber of Culture. Culture was controlled. For example, Hitler was portrayed as a powerful military leader. In 1937, the exhibition of great German art was held in Munich. Music by Jewish composers such as Friedrich Mendelssohn was banned. Hitler's favourite composers such as Richard Wagner, Richard Strauss and Joseph Bruckner were favoured. In terms of architecture, Hitler described architecture as the world in stone. He favoured architecture based on Greek and Roman ideas which would demonstrate the power of the Nazis. In 1934, the Nazis created the Ehrentemple, the Honour Temple, as a memorial to the 16 Nazis who died in the Munich Beer Hall Putsch. Albert Speer was Hitler's personal architect. In terms of literature, the Nazis organised the burning of the book ceremony in Berlin to publicly destroy books that did not support Nazi ideas. Around 20,000 books were burnt, including All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque, because it had anti-war sentiments. Nazis favoured books that glorified war or peasant rural values like blood and soil. The best-selling book in Nazi Germany was Mein Kampf. People were strongly encouraged to own a copy. Hitler did not believe that Nazism and Christianity were compatible. Most Germans identified as Christians, with around 40 million Protestants and 22 million Catholics. The Nazis did not attack Christianity in their rise to power, and when Hitler came to power, some Christians were sympathetic to some aspects of Nazism, such as the focus on traditional family values. However, the Nazis glorified war and violence, whereas the Church taught peace, love and respect, causing tensions between Nazism and the Church. There were many different Protestant churches within Germany, and the Nazis sought to unite them all under one Reich Church. Bishop Ludwig Müller, a Nazi, was made Reich Bishop of Germany. Some Protestant churches displayed swastikas, and church services began and ended with the Hitler salute. Many Protestants disliked this Reich Church, and so some Protestant pastors or priests joined the Confessional Church, which rejected Nazi control of the church. The Confessional Church was led by Pastor Martin Niemöller. They set up the Pastors' Emergency League to organise opposition to Hitler. By 1934, it had support of 7,000 out of 17,000 Protestant pastors. In 1937, Niemöller was arrested and sent to a concentration camp. In terms of the Catholic Church, the Nazis saw the Catholic Church as a threat. Catholics were loyal to the Pope. There are also many Catholic youth groups, and the Catholics had their own political party called the Centre Party. In July 1933, the Nazis and the Catholics signed a Concordat. The Catholic Church agreed not to interfere in politics, and the Nazis said it would not interfere with the Catholic Church, including their youth groups and schools. But the Nazis went back on this agreement. Many Catholic schools were closed down, and youth groups were closed down from 1936, Catholic youth groups. A propaganda campaign in 1937 discredited priests, and monasteries were accused of financial and sexual misconduct. Pope Pius XI issued a sermon in 1937 to be read out on Palm Sunday called With Burning Anxiety. It openly criticised the Nazi treatment of the Catholic Church and attacked Nazi racial policies. A 1937 Nazi order banning crucifixes in classrooms was withdrawn after public protests. These events showed the power of the Catholic Church to oppose the Nazis. Right, the final topic we're going to look at is opposition, resistance and conformity. We're going to look at the extent of support for the Nazi regime, opposition from the churches, including the role of Pastor Niemöller, who we've already found out about a little bit, and opposition from the young, including the swing youth and the Edelweiss pirates. So to what extent did the German people support the Nazis? Well, the Nazis gained 43.9% of the votes in the March 1933 election. However, the election was not fully fair, with there being lots of voter intimidation. Some did support the Nazis because they fulfilled their promise of giving people work and bread. There was a cult of the Führer in Nazi Germany, with some people almost worshipping Hitler. Many individuals and groups, such as the church, did oppose the Nazis. But 90% of Germans voted in favour of Hitler becoming Führer after the death of Hindenburg in August 1934, although it's hard to judge whether this was a fair vote. Propaganda and censorship made it difficult to voice opposition. It made it seem to people the Nazis were popular and did have support. It's estimated that 300,000 people left Germany in the 1930s due to opposing the Nazis. Many political opponents, like communists, were sent to concentration camps, and there were attempts to assassinate Hitler in the 1930s. The most famous was the attempt by George Elzer, who planted a bomb in a Munich beer hall in November 1939. So in terms of church opposition, let's talk about Martin Niemöller and the German Confessional Church. Niemöller was a First World War hero and a Protestant pastor. He refused to join the Reich Church and establish an alternative non-Nazi confessional church. By 1934, 7,000 pastors had joined, leaving only a couple of thousand left in the Reich Church. Niemöller and the Confessional Church preached against Nazi racial policy, and over 800 pastors were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Niemöller was sent to Sachsenhausen outside Berlin and then Dachau concentration camp, but he survived. Paul Schneider was the first priest to be murdered by the Nazis. He was a small-town Protestant pastor. He began to preach against Nazi church policy in 1933. He joined the Confessional Church and was arrested in 1934 and 1935. He was warned to stop his protest, but he continued. In 1937, he banned parishioners who were Nazis from attending his church services. He was imprisoned at Buchenwald concentration camp and murdered by lethal injection in 1939. Jehovah's Witnesses were unwilling to comply with the Nazi state. They refused the Hitler salute and refused compulsory military service due to their pacifist beliefs. They began writing anti-Nazi leaflets. It led to the Gestapo creating a special unit to combat them. By 1939, 6,000 had been imprisoned in concentration camps. In terms of church opposition, Pope Pius XI signed a concordat with the Nazis in 1933, but by 1937 he spoke out against the Nazis. He wrote a letter called With Burning Anxiety, which was smuggled into Germany and read out in all the Catholic churches on Palm Sunday, always one of the biggest congregations of the year. The letter condemned Nazi ideology, and the very next day the Gestapo raided every Catholic church and seized copies of the letter. It led to the Nazis intensifying their actions against the Catholic Church. Now, Cardinal Galen was the Catholic Bishop of Munster in Germany, and he initially supported the Nazis. In 1933, there were SA and swastika flags at his consecration as a bishop, but by 1934, his sermons were criticising Nazi policies due to its racial policies. The Gestapo was sent to question Galen, but he was too high profile to remove from power or to prosecute, so he was able to continue to resist. Now, there was also a lot of youth opposition in Nazi Germany. There was the swing youth, who were mainly middle-class young people. They listened to jazz music and boys grew their hair long. Girls wore makeup. They met in bars and houses. They were not actively involved in politics, but they did follow American fashions, music and culture. Some members were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Himmler saw the groups as dangerous, so he personally wrote to Reinhard Heydrich asking the Gestapo to deal with them. Many were arrested and were sent to concentration camps. In terms of the youth opposition, the Edelweiss Pirates, they were a rebel youth group popular amongst the working class. They picked fights with the Hitler Youth and listened to jazz music. They wore clothes like check shirts and white socks, which the Nazis didn't approve of. During the Second World War, they had 2,000 members. However, they were not a united threat to the Nazis. They wrote anti-Nazi graffiti, distributed anti-Nazi leaflets, and helped army deserters. From December 1942, the Gestapo arrested 739 Edelweiss Pirates. Some were tried and executed, and others were sent to concentration camps. So why was it difficult to oppose the Nazis? Well, it was hard to oppose the Nazi rule because of the role of the Gestapo. It was greatly feared and it had the power to arrest and imprison anybody suspected of opposing the Nazi state. This meant that people were too scared and frightened to speak out as they perceived they could easily get arrested. People felt they had to speak through a flower, say only good things about the Nazis. It was also hard to oppose Nazi rule because the punishments for doing so were so huge. In March 1933, the first concentration camp was set up at Dachau. Originally, concentration camps were created to imprison political opposition. People feared the camps and therefore it made it hard to oppose Nazi rule. It also removed high-profile opponents such as Martin Niemöller. It was also hard to oppose Nazi rule as the opposition that there was not united or organised. For example, the Social Democrats and Communists opposed the Nazis, but they did not work together. The Christian Church also opposed the Nazis, but Jehovah's Witnesses, German Confessional Church, and Catholic opposition, such as from the Pope, did not really coordinate or work together. It was also really hard to oppose Nazi rule because of propaganda and censorship. This misinformation, overseen by Joseph Goebbels, meant that ordinary German citizens were indoctrinated to believe the Nazi state was good and it was enemies of the state being imprisoned. Effective propaganda techniques such as the cheap radio sets, which 70% owned by 1939, helped the Nazis get support. Okay, so thanks very much for listening to that revision video about topic 3, Nazi control and dictatorship. Hope that was useful and good luck with your exams.